Okay, welcome to 1000 Ways to be a Champion for Children. My name is Alan Friesen. This show is about increasing awareness about adverse childhood experiences with the intent to prevent or minimize the effects of adverse childhood experiences. My guest today is Jim Bennett. Jim Bennett is a champion for children of the 9th degree. He's a 9th degree black belt champion for children. Is that right, Jim? I think that's about right, eh?
Oh, thank you.
Anyways, Jim does amazing work with our First Nations people. And as you know, we're broadcasting from the ancestral home of the Blackfoot Nation. And here we are, and our ACEs is all about adverse childhood experiences, and kids have those, and we want to stop that from happening. We want to prevent the devastating impact of adverse childhood experiences and help kids heal from that. And the kiddos who have the most burden of that are our Indigenous kiddos, our brothers and sisters, Indigenous brothers and sisters, and their kiddos, right? That's the folks that we can really make a big difference. Because, Jim, you got the numbers, but they're 5% of our population in Lethbridge and 60% of the jail population and 90% of the homeless population and 80% of the folks that have a substance abuse disorders. It's something like that, isn't it?
You're pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us more about what you've been doing, Jim. Well, first of all, Jim is a police officer. He's a Rotarian, and he spends a lot of time on the reserve making a difference with families there. I think there's, 9 families that have adopted Jim, said he's one of us kind of thing. Is that right?
14 families on the Blood Reserve, 1 family on the Pagan Reserve.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. And, for our viewers, would it be a big surprise if Indigenous people did not trust white people? I think that would be the norm. That's how it should be, because for 150 years, we've been trying to beat the culture out of them and tell them they're not human and all kinds of other horrible things so that they trust Jim. Obviously, he's making a big difference in their community. So Jim, with your acceptance there, what difference are you trying to make?
So a lot of the work I do is trying to bring basic human needs to people on the Blood Reserve. And a lot of the work I've done has been with youth. I've started 13 years ago, so I'm now seeing kids who I started who are in grade 1, who now are graduated, having kids, going to university. So I very first started with youth on the reserve in 2009 with the Royal Canadian Army Cadet Corps, Kainai number 2384. So the Army Reserve cadets on the reserve. These kids, again, there's not too many funded programs that receive sustained funding out there for kids. And the Army Cadets is something that I love the aspect of the structure, the life skills that it could teach these kids. And again, some of these kids come from less than humble means, let's just say that. And for them to get off the reserve and take them to Calgary to an event or go somewhere on a field trip, it got them, it exposed them to things they might not have been able to see and do. So that was the one thing I did all the way up until 2017, until my life got a little too busy. My family came along and my kids started getting older. I'm still associated with the Army Cadets. I just can't go every week. So that's the first thing where I really, really got involved with these kids, is giving them something to look forward to, giving them some structure, and giving them some positive male role model and a positive role model as being a police officer. Because as you said, Alan, breaking into the blood tribe police, when I did, I was one of, I think, 4 or 5 non-Indigenous people out of 32 people. And, the blood tribe police exists because of something called the Rolfe Inquiry, where basically, as we're hearing down the States, our Indigenous people weren't being treated as well as they should have been by the RCMP. So the inquiry is why blood tribe were created. So they essentially kicked out the RCMP. And so when I came in, 20 years later, as one of the few white guys, yeah, you know what? I had to work very, very hard to be accepted. And the way I did that was helping. So in Blackfoot, our motto back then for the Blood Tribe Police Service was helping one another, which in Blackfoot is aspamotio. So I quickly tried to learn a bit of the language. I quickly, on my days off, started coming to events, started coming to powwows. Then kind of just snowballed into being invited to sweat lodges, being invited to the Sundance, going to view these ceremonies, these ceremonies involving these sacred bundles, these sacred societies, and that again it just compounded, and I got a good name for myself within the first year of really busting my ass to just be a good person. So they saw who I was on the inside, not just a uniform representing colonialism, representing authority, representing, abuse, because anything really in authority, you go from residential schools, you go from the Indian agent, you go from all these outside agencies and things dictating to the indigenous population what they couldn't do. Well, here I came along and, in that uniform that represented that. And it was it was a rough go the first little bit, but projects like my Blood Tribe Police Association, we funded kind of a lunch program at the library in the summertime. You got to understand that these kids who come from really nothing, they're fed 10 months of the year, breakfast and lunch at their schools. And once July hits, once school's out, there's no food.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens? Petty crime happens, thefts happen, people will steal stuff to pawn to get food for their kids. Kids will flock to the public library that opened a few years ago on the reserve. They have Wi-Fi there that's free. And these librarians will try to stock something for these kids to eat. And so my association has made numerous donations. Rotary has actually made donations to this library. So that's one little thing that we're trying to do to, again, cover basic human needs. These kids need to be fed.
Speaking of, and that's like, how much more basic does it get than that, right? A little person getting something in their belly so that they can concentrate and have energy to do their day and learn and grow, right? Nothing more basic than that. But also, you had said even about where there's with the shelter that shuts down for a couple months out of the year, people are living rough, right? There's no place for them to go. So that's where you and the Raymond Rotary Club, I don't know where I was going with Raymond Rotary Club created these little kind of like mini houses, I'm going to call them, kind of a thing, or
bunk houses. Yeah,
bunk houses.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's, how many of those did you make?
We made 5 that housed a total of 20 people. And that includes all the mattresses, all the blankets with homemade quilts. These things are insulated. A hurricane won't blow these things down.
Nice. Yeah, that's amazing. Because otherwise they're sleeping in tents. And that was when they didn't have access to the shelter was what months?
April to October.
Yeah.
April 1st.
That's a big chunk of time to be living out in the elements. I mean, in July, it's a different deal than it is in October. That's for sure. So, wow.
So I know that this doesn't have to do with kids specifically, but we provided my community, my church, a Rotary provided tents, sleeping bags, hygiene kits, survival backpacks over the last 9 years until we finally got to build these things. And now with COVID's kind of changed things. That sure. The shelters are staying open longer, but they're about to shut down again.
Mm-hmm.
So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So from your first thing with the cadets part of it, you did that for how many years? Did you say 7 years?
Well, no, it's from 2009 to 2017, every week, basically, during the school year, and then summer camps and things like that.
Yeah, that's a chunk of time. My goodness.
I'm still on the steering committee. I'm still a signing authority. I still go and support them at their year-end events, and if I see them, I always say hi. So,
yeah. Nice. That's awesome. Hey, I was talking to my friend Donna today, and we got on a little chat about First Nations type thing, or Aboriginal type folks and that, or Indigenous people. And, she was talking about the big checks that Indigenous people get every month. And I said, I don't think that's the way it works. Enlighten us, Jim. What is the deal with the payments that the Aboriginal people receive from the federal government? What is that?
So I do a facts talk, and I dispel these myths and misconceptions. So in 1877, when they signed Treaty Number 7, their annual allotment was $5 a year. So to this day, September 22nd, they'll have an event called Treaty 7 Days. You'll go to one of the designated gymnasiums. You'll have a table with your last name. A Mountie will be there in red serge with brand new, crisp, from the mint, $5 bills. You sign your name to the ledger. You get handed a nice new $5 bill, get a handshake, and that's it. So this misconception where it came from is you look at tribes like Hobima in the 80s who finally got to utilize their own resources. They weren't siphoned off the reserve. The reserve was in control. And they made it so, you hear these stories that when somebody turned 18, they got a large payment. Rumor is $100,000. Don't know if that's true, but they did get a big chunk of money on their 18th birthday from these oil royalties that they kept in trust. And that's where you hear these things. And then, So when I talk to school groups, especially off the reserve, I'll have a little Google contest where I'll ask them, find out this, because a lot of people won't believe me.
Yes. Yeah.
So find out for yourself. You don't want to believe me, that is fine. Go Google Treaty 7 and ask what or just Google treaty payment, Treaty 7. You'll come up with the same answer.
Got it. $5. So unless they're fortunate enough to be on some land that has resources and they control those resources, because that's not always the case, right? The model in the past is the Indian agent was the guy who basically agency, I don't know what they are, but basically they would be the intermediary between the indigenous people and the white people, and they would buy for $10 and sell for 100, kind of a thing. Is that?
That's exactly right. 100 years ago, that's exactly how it was.
Yes.
100 years ago and longer than that. So, it just it's been, the whole thing's been set up to fail. Even to this day, land out there. If somebody has, let's say, 500 acres of land out there, they are the land occupant. Now, if you or I had 500 acres that we wanted to farm, we would take that acre worth $5,000 an acre. We go to the bank and say, hey, I have 500 acres, 1,000 acres. I'd like a loan to buy a tractor to farm my land or the equipment to farm my land. Bank would give that to us.
Sure.
They can't do that because they don't own the land. They're just land occupants. So that's why they have a whole bunch of white farmers that come and lease the land. And the tribe gets, I think, 30%. The farmer gets 30%. And then the rest will be split up some number like that, 30-30-30 or whatever it is, or 40-30-30. And then the tribe holds it in trust. And then the non-land occupants get a farm check 3 times a year.
Got it. So whatever that resource makes is collectively shared with all of the people on the reserve that are part of that community. Yeah. Yeah.
So that farmer so nobody can really get ahead because that farmer, how can he go buy $1 million worth of equipment to farm his own land? He'd still have to pay the tribe some of that money because he doesn't own that land.
Right.
It's crown land. It's reserve land.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Huh. So I think that's a huge misconception because I hear a lot of people think, the indigenous people, they get big checks. The federal government's writing big checks out of our tax dollars. $5. That's it. $5 per each indigenous person who are part of Treaty 7. Other treaties probably have different deals, right? Like other treaties throughout
$4.
Canada.
One's $4. I think one's $6. You have to just kind of go across Canada when the treaties were signed to see, they actually, part of it, they were one of the treaties up north. They were supposed to get plows and cows. Plows and cows were part of in the actual treaty. The government never gave them those plows and cows. It was just a couple of years ago that they sued the federal government. It took 20, 30 years for them to finally say, yeah, okay, we owe you all this money. And they just got a huge multi-million-dollar payout for all the plows and cows that they did not give to the people in their treaty rights. Mm-hmm. So you can Google plows and cows payment, and you can find out what they actually got. So that's another example of failed treaty promises.
Right. And another one that's very controversial is about the what's it called? The medicine chest. That part of a lot of the agreements had like a medicine chest type thing, but it was very ill defined what that meant, right? But in terms of medical supports for Indigenous people, right? Do you know what our Treaty 7 thing is like in that regard?
Oh, you know what? You're this makes me so angry. You look at the stats, and these are stats you can find again online. The health outcomes of Indigenous people are at least 11 years of less of life expectancy. The health outcomes for cancer rates, all these different things are so much lower than mainstream society. I know AHS is working very hard to close the gap so they have the same health outcomes. So this medicine chest, they're basically the provincial and federal governments are being held to account these last few years as to why Indigenous health outcomes are so low. Well, we're in the 21st century. We're one of the most affluent countries in the world.
Yeah.
So it's ridiculous. And that's a whole long thing you can get into as why that is and why it continues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, without clean water, there's lots of reserves that don't have clean water, right? Don't have drinkable water. And there's many, like our neighbors just down the road, where they have huge food insecurity problems, right? I mean, as you were saying, while school's enforced, they got breakfast and lunch, those 2 meals covered every day, right? Yeah. But when school's not enforced, that's a huge problem. And not everybody goes to school, right? So how about adults if they don't have, enough dollars to be putting groceries on the table, right? So,
Alan, it's funny you said the clean drinking water, because last week the federal government, the Liberal government, reneged on their promise. One of their promises back in 2015 in their election campaign was by March 2021, all reserves in Canada would have access to clean drinking water. They just pushed that back 5 years.
5 years?
5 more years. So I believe there's 87 or somewhere in that number in Canada who don't have access to reliable, clean drinking water. They've been under boil advisories for their entire lives.
Wow. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you tell me if this theory makes sense. Here's my theory. Adverse childhood experiences. We know that if they're unchecked, the higher the number of adverse childhood experiences, the worse life outcomes, worse health, shorter lifespan, a tougher time forming relationships, tougher time learning, tougher time having a good life, basically, is high numbers of ACEs that are unchecked. With our Indigenous folks, where they've experienced those ACEs as well, plus the systemic racism and the discrimination that happens that way. And so for them, those like the biggest gains we can get are by helping our Indigenous folks, right? Like the biggest gains we can get in our community. And do you know who Dr. Bruce Perry is?
I've heard the name, yes.
Yeah. So anyways, he's the author of The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And so recently he had a little conference on with Shelley and Moses Spear Chief and Dr. Bruce Perry. And it was the neurosequential model and wisdom of the elders. And in essence, here's what he was saying. Before white people came and messed up the First Nations type culture, they had a perfect situation for raising little people, for giving them, supports and encouragement. And there'd be like 3 adults for every child to make sure that child got guided and led and supported and encouraged. And they had a very, it wasn't perfect, but a very idyllic lifestyle that basically, if we could return to that degree of connection with our kin, that degree of connection with our kiddos, a lot of ACEs would just evaporate. They just go away, right? Because the connectivity with a caring adult has a huge buffering effect with kids, has a huge restorative effect with kids, and a preventative effect, right? Those relationships are super important. Do you agree?
Oh, do you know what, Alan? This is a direct correlation of what happened in residential school. This intergenerational trauma that continues today, 7 generations. So I'm going to tell you two stories. So I've had the opportunity when people have adopted me, trust me, is when they start telling me stories.
Sure.
I've heard some heartbreaking stories about residential school. I'm going to share a few with you.
Sure,
so
please do.
I was actually with, I was giving my facts talk, which I call it, to a religious group of ladies. a ladies group, and I had my 2 daughters with me, and at the time they were 5, 6 years old. And I said to them, and this again, this is all what's been told to me. I said to these ladies, "What do you think would happen to a parent or even these children? Look at it from the parent's point of view, and look at it from the kid's point of view. 5 or 6 years old, truck drives up to the house, takes your children, just takes them. If you don't give them, the RCP comes and takes them by force. You go now to an environment where these kids are not fed properly to the point of starvation. They're not allowed to cry. They're not allowed to show emotion. They don't see their families. Some of these kids didn't see their families for 10 months of the year. They weren't allowed to speak their language. So I used my 2 little girls, my 2 little blonde hair, blue-eyed girls. And I'm saying that for a reason, because I want that correlation of, if they were blonde hair, blue-eyed, compared to if they were a native child nowadays, look at that difference. And take them away if they spoke their language. Let's say they had to go and learn Russian. Not to pick on the Russians. I love the Russians. But let's say they now were forced to go learn Russian. If they spoke English, they're beaten. If their own sibling was on the other side of the school, boys and girls were separated, they wouldn't even be able to see their own sibling. They were not allowed to see their family. They never received any love. They never received any affection. They were never, ever again allowed to show any emotion. Constant state of fear because of the bullies, because of the physical and sexual abuse there. I asked the crowd I was talking to, I'm like, what do you think would happen? I happened to have a child psychologist in the group. And I said, Nancy, what would happen here? She's like, well, their brains would not develop the same. They would not have a fully developed brain the same as you or I would because of the lack, these ACEs you're talking about. Again, direct correlation. Yep. Direct correlation. And so now you have 7 generations of people. These mothers at home, these families at home now cannot even take care of their own children. And when the children come back, they're little foreigners. They speak a different language. Their hair's cut. They act different. They're not the same little child.
Right. And those kids that were growing up in residential school, what did they learn about being a parent? Like, now for them to go to the next, to be parents, to have relationships, how did they learn anything? They didn't, right? They learned a very sterile, hostile environment is basically all they learned, right? So
I have a coworker who is in his 50s who told me that his mother growing up never told him she loved him. Yeah. Wasn't able to. And that's a story I've heard repeatedly over the past how many years. Yeah. So that's just the perspective. Well, right. There's always a backstory. As you know, with ACEs, every kid has this backstory as to why they are the way they are. Right. What's missing, what they're not getting, or what's happening to them that's caused these reactions and these developmental issues, all these things we see to this day, on or off the reserve.
Yeah, no, I agree. And a friend of mine, and you might heard of him before, David Irvin. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's all about authentic leadership, finding your voice, making your contribution, those kind of things. But he had said the other day, which I thought was very telling. He said that violence is what happens when you don't know what to do with your suffering. So you get little, kiddos who've been raised, suffered, where they were physically abused, sexually abused, insulted, treated like animals, basically, for the time that they were in the residential schools. And then, so is that a suffering? Yeah, that's years and years of suffering. No love to offset that in any way, right? No care and attention that you would normally get. And so they have this suffering, and if they don't know how to express it, it's going to come out in violence. That's basically what happens. When it comes out in violence, then that just perpetuates that cycle again, right? Now we have more ACEs occurring, and that it continues on. So, wow.
And you look at the poverty rates, where if you're raised in poverty, that's what you're used to. That's what you know. It's very hard to break that cycle. So yeah. I see it every day at work.
Yeah, I bet you do. So my thought on this basically is, if the indigenous ways were the right way to raise little people, maybe we can get a restoration of that where the indigenous people can share that with us as well, with their kiddos, but with us as well. And maybe that's a healing for all of us.
You know what? When like you said at the start, when they say they adopt you, in their culturally adopted, it literally means like they've adopted you. And somebody told me when they found out I had 14 families on the blood reserve, it's like, you are a rich man with love.
Mm-hmm.
You are well loved, and you know what? I feel it.
Yeah, sure.
And if we had that holistic approach of a whole family based approach to raising kids, it takes a village to raise a child. That whole thing, what? You're exactly right, Alan. That would change everything.
Mm. My bride, Corolla, is watching our little broadcast, and she says the parents didn't even know their children when they came home, right? Like the kids who are in residential schools, when they get to return to their homes years later, like as you said, they're a stranger, right? Who is this little person who dresses funny and talks funny, and like we don't know who this kid is, right? So,
and they came home ashamed of their language, ashamed of their culture, ashamed of their traditions and all the ceremonies they went to.
Yes.
It literally was beaten out of them. They were told that they're inferior, just like you said. So when you have that, did they want to teach their own kids the language? No, they didn't, because they didn't want their kids to go through the same thing that they had to. So that's why you see these generation of 50 and less, really across Canada, across North America, with Indigenous languages. There's little pockets everywhere you go that have kept the language alive. But as a whole group, there's very few fluent speakers under the age of 60.
Mm-hmm.
Not many.
It's interesting. I watched what's it called? Circle in the Sun, I think it's called.
Yep.
Yeah. And so in that one they were talking about that. I think it was in 1962 it was filmed, and they were talking about the Sundance ceremony, and that this might be the last one ever. But they've done it every year. Right? They've done it every year. Still has never died. That ceremony is still alive and well, right? So
it is. And what's neat, a bit of history about this one on the blood reserve, is when the Indian agent in the late 1800s tried to shut it down, they secretly kept it going. So it's been an unbroken Sundance for thousands of years, you could say.
Right. Yeah. And the star of that show is the father to our friend
Travis
played it here, right?
Yeah.
His dad was the kind of the star of that show.
Pete was my good friend up until when he passed.
Okay, yeah.
He was my great friend. I sat and had breakfast with all those old guys every morning on my day shifts at the local restaurant.
And that was Pete Standing Alone, right? Is that correct? Yeah, Pete Standing Alone. Yeah. It's a cool movie to watch. It's on the National Film Board, right? Yeah. And they've got, these First Nation. Well, go ahead. What were you saying?
There's three of them.
Oh,
there's three that follow his life. They go back in the 80s, do it again, and they go back in the late 2010-ish, 2015, and do it again while he's still alive.
Really? Oh, yeah. Wow. Is that right? So is Travis going to take up his dad's legacy and start cranking out movies here as well, or?
Oh, Travis has that ability. That is for sure. He has that gift of gab, and his personality would go well, I believe, with any kind of production.
Yeah. I don't know if this is culturally appropriate, but because he said it, I think it's okay. Travis was the MC at the Indian relay races. Mm-hmm. And the Indian relay races are amazing. I just had so much fun watching them. And they're like, these folks are really athletic, and they got like no equipment, right? Just jump on these horses and go crazy. But anyways, Travis had said something like, okay, we're going to take a break now. 10 minutes, and that's white mad time. So, and I just cracked up, right? Because that was...
They do have the best sense of humor. Actually, so Travis is my adopted brother, because I'm adopted into Pete's family.
Oh, okay. There you go. So that's your brother. Cool. Yeah. Nice. And I think you, with your recognition for what you do with the Indigenous people and the difference you want to make, there's some special recognition that you have received, correct, Jim?
A few things.
Yes, a few things. But one of them that you have, I've seen once, is amazing, is that headdress. Do you have that around?
I do. Here, give me one
Can you show
second.
it to us?
Sure.
Oh, that is amazing. Wow. And so do you know who built that? Who
Yeah.
like yeah?
His name is Denver and Dallas Hoof are the ones that built this. So all this beadwork you see here all has a story as to my warrior history. It was the Kainai Warrior Society, the Veteran Society, that inducted me, captured me into their society, and then gave this. I went through a ceremony to receive this. So
Nice. That is beautiful. Yeah, that's amazing. And Corolla says, "Wow to the headdress." Yeah, that's amazing. And then also like this is a sacred piece of art, right? That you have right there. And that was specifically for you to tell your story, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. And tell us about bundles.
So I'm not going to speak too much about bundles, but they there are a large number of bundles still on the blood reserve, and these bundle holders basically make sacred vows. There's all these protocols with owning a bundle. So being a bundle holder is a huge, huge undertaking, a huge responsibility. So they're making covenants, they're making promises that they're going to live a certain life and do certain things for the community, like be that example in the community. And it comes with all these different sacred songs, sacred privileges. If you ever get invited to a bundle opening, like make sure you go.
Cool.
I've been invited to one, and it's a full day thing. Like it's a full day thing. And one of the cool things, I'm actually a child of the Thunderpipe bundle. I went to the opening 2015, and this Thunderpipe. This is a hot day in August, not a cloud in sight, and we're in this teepee going through these ceremonies, and where you smoke the pipe as part of the ceremony, and not a cloud in the sky, 35 degrees, and I had one of my adopted brothers. His name is Tom Russell, and he was explaining everything as we were going. And I actually got to sit in the inner circle, a few people down from the bundle, and he said, "Jim, like the thunder is going to be coming. They're calling the thunder." And not a word of a lie. Again, a cloudless day, 35 degrees, no wind. About 3 or 4 hours into the ceremony, boom, 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 thunder.
Interesting. Wow.
Oh my goodness! Like I have goosebumps even just sharing that experience, because unless you were there, you wouldn't believe that this thunder pipe called the thunder.
Wow.
On a cloudless day. There must have called a few clouds, but there it was.
You know what I love about I was at a thing just recently. It was Communities Ending Poverty is what it's about. And there was a blessing from Elder Wallace. There's him and his wife. I can't remember. Elder Wallace. And anyways, with them, they talked about and they prayed for the connectivity with everything, that we're connected to everything. We're connected to the sun and the moon and the rocks and everybody, every human and being, every animal we're connected to, right? And the prayer was for all of us, for all of that we all be healthy, that we all be happy, that we all, enjoy the fruits and be grateful for all of the things that we get from this bounty, from this, from the other people in our lives and from our world, basically. I thought it was it's so integrated and so connected to everything. I love it.
So that makes me think of a story. So I've done many drives for the homeless population, food, clothing, a lot of different things. And I went to the Moses Lake shelter. Moses Lake is just across the street from Cardston. The community is just across the street on the blood reserve. And they have a shelter. This is the shelter that we built these bunkhouses for. But I went in there with a whole bunch of winter coats, mitts, all these things. And there's about probably 30 people on at a time. And one of the people was sleeping over in the corner. And one of the girls, she's a female, one of the other girls found this beautiful, beautiful warm winter coat. And she said, "You know what? I think she would want that." She had nothing. She had first dibs on the nicest coat there.
Mm-hmm.
She chose to give it to the person that was sleeping it off over in the corner. And she went and laid it down on her. This person had absolutely nothing and chose to give the best thing there to her friend over herself.
Yeah.
I see that every day with how people have treated me, how they've treated my family. Like I think every single one of my family members has a ribbon skirt and moccasins. My little guy, I have a 10-month-old son. He got I call it a cradle board. In Navajo, it was called a cradle board, but like a baby bag. This thing's not cheap. Just given to me.
Nice.
You know, like it's crazy. Like you give a little and you receive 100 times back. Oh, in indigenous culture, really, like you do. And I can't say enough about how much I love the people of the Piikani and Gana, the blood tribe, the Pagan tribe. You know, they've been nothing but good to me and my family. So I absolutely love them with all my heart, and I'm trying to help them every day I can.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's important work, because man, we need to embrace, we need them as to come in, like, not, we don't want to take away any of their culture, but we certainly need to be able to acknowledge them, support them, encourage them, and collectively do a better job for all our kiddos, right? To get them the experiences they have, that they need to have a good life, to be able to become a good parent at some point, become a good member of the community, you know, those kind of things. With your extensive experience with Indigenous people, there's some people that really kind of have a concern with First Nations concept of time, because they don't see time like you and I do, I don't think, many times, right? So do you know more? Do you have some insights about that?
I do, and this is just one example. Like, sure, like Travis will kid around about Indian time, white time, but you know what? This is completely colonialism. This is part of colonialism. We have forced what we do onto them. You know, I've been to lots of different meetings where basically people, they'll give you a time frame, but things, when people are ready to begin, especially if it's an elder leading something, when he's ready, you show respect. You will wait till that elder is ready to impart his knowledge on you. Okay. You know, and really, for how much in residential schools, that whole time thing, you know, when stuff's forced upon you, you know, do you embrace it? Yeah. No, you don't. So there really is, like, if you went to Africa and you went to some foreign country that had complete different culture, and you walked up to them and said, "Hey, you're late. You said we're going to start at 10. We're late." You know, let's say they have a complete different way of thinking. You know, that's what we have here. Yeah. We have a different way of thinking, a different way of life completely, that you know, they have to live in two worlds. You know? And I've learned to live in both worlds. Yeah. So I have an understanding, you know, why they are the way they are. I have an understanding about their past, of their cultural, like their beliefs, those things. So until you have that understanding of both worlds, you know, I'd tell people just, you know, be quiet, you know, politely, like you don't know what you're talking about. Like, just accept it. This is the way it is. You know, this is well, it is.
And if you think about it, historically, they didn't have, you know, clocks. They didn't have calendars, right? Everything was based on seasons, where the moon was. Even the Sundance Festival, it was when the blueberries were ripe or something, or there was some kind of berry that came into fruit, and that was the time for the Sundance Festival, right? So you don't mark it on a calendar. It's, the berries are ready. It's time for the Sundance Festival, right? So, yeah.
And I wouldn't, again, we don't just, I'd say to people who are watching this, just don't judge people until you know more about them. You know, just different cultures do things different ways. Yeah. You know, but again, like they do, a lot of them do walk in both worlds. They punch a clock, they show up to work on time, they leave on time, you know, but just certain things, it is what it is. Yeah. You know, you can't make them 100% like us.
My friend Chris Yock was telling me, he says, well, here's why. Indigenous people see no separation of space and time. Space and time is the same thing. And I'm like, well, I don't quite understand what he means. But I think he's saying that when if Travis Playhead here walks in the room, then he's here now. He's at this space at this time, and that's all that matters. Like whether you're supposed to be there 10 minutes ago, according to something on my wrist, really doesn't matter. It just doesn't come into the equation, right? So, yeah, cool. What else did you want to share with us? You were telling us. Go ahead.
Well, no, there's a lot of things. I'll give you a bit of this facts talk.
Sure,
so
please do.
You have what we talked about with the $5 deal. Did you know, Alan, that Indigenous people in Canada did not have the right to vote until 1960?
1960. Wow.
1960. So here are these soldiers, World War I, World War II, Korea. They volunteered to go fight for a country where they couldn't leave the reserve. So back until the late 40s, you would have to have a pass from the Indian agent to leave the reserve. If you were caught off the reserve without a pass, you went to jail for 30 days. Here are these volunteers from these reserves. Canada did not consider them citizens. They had no right to vote. They couldn't even leave their reserve. Yet here they went and fought for Canada. They came back. It wasn't until these World War II vets came back. Again, equals. Wherever they went in the world to fight for Canada, they were equals. They come back to the reserve, and now they can't even leave their reserve. So it wasn't until 1960 these men fought and died for Canada, came back injured, and had no rights until 1960.
Wow.
Like a lot of people don't know that. So It wasn't until the late 70s or the 80s that these Indigenous veterans, I would say a white veteran who fought for Canada got this much money from Veterans Affairs. An Indigenous person who fought for Canada got about 15%.
15%.
Probably about that, yeah, roughly. And it wasn't until the late 70s they finally formed enough of a movement that they fought Veterans Affairs, and they got the same rights and privileges as the rest of the veterans of Canada did. So a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. And how, and for somebody who voluntarily goes to war to support a country that doesn't even accept them, that's, a pretty generous act to do that as well, right? Yeah. Wow.
So who here, again, I always ask people, raise your hand if you've heard that Indigenous people don't pay taxes. I heard that before I started.
Me do too. Yeah.
Yeah. So 5% of the population is Indigenous, but only less than 1% of those actually work on a reserve. So to be considered tax-free, you have to be Indigenous, and you actually have to work on a reserve to be tax-free.
Right.
So,
and the only real job on the reserve is in the band administration type stuff, right? That's kind of like there isn't a whole bunch of other industries, grocery stores, feedlots, things like that. They just don't exist there, right?
Not much. So even if they live on reserve and they drive into Lethbridge to work, they still pay taxes. So
right.
They're no different. They're no different than you and I.
Right.
We kind of already talked about the housing. We talked about the land, but for houses, they get free houses. Well, yeah, they'll get a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom bungalow with an unfinished basement. And they'll pay roughly $500 a month for 25 years. But again, they don't own the house. They paid a mortgage for 25 years, but they don't own the house unless they built that house themselves. Because the tribe will build these cookie cutter houses, and then people will get them. So if they went to the bank to get a line of credit, a home equity line of credit, or to say I've paid a mortgage for 15 years, it means nothing.
Right.
They have no equity, and they get no credit for it.
Right.
So
and also, I think, am I understanding correctly, financial agencies can't seize any assets on the reserve. Like they can't even go there and take a truck away that wasn't being paid for or something, right?
They can. They do. Some of these guys repo. They do. So that has changed, and that's kind of American thing. So yeah, it's difficult. Like again, so these banks, how can people get ahead? They have a mortgage, but they can't get a loan at the bank for $1,000 because they don't own their home because it's on Crown land,
Yeah.
It's owned by the reserve. So again, who here has heard that Indigenous people in Canada have a free university education? Every man, woman, and child get free education. No. Wrong. So again, some of these tribes who have these assets, these oil and gas revenues, they put money aside and they can send people bursaries and grants and things. I was actually on the Pagani Youth Education Foundation for 4 years. I was a board member, and that we gave bursaries, grants, and things. But that came from the Old Man River Trust Fund.
Right. Not like the federal
trust. That was just money that the interest every year they had of this money put in trust from the Old Man River Dam when that was built.
Right. So it's not like it's coming from us as taxpayers, those sources. No. Yeah, got it.
Well, and it's only about 15% of the people who apply for those grants or these things, funding from the tribe, who will get them. And that's nothing to do with the federal government. The federal government has no fiduciary responsibility to educate people past high school on the reserves. So again, we already talked about the $5 deal, but I'm going to tell you a story about the tent city that what made me want to build these bunkhouses.
Sure, let's hear.
So these people from Moses Lake will migrate over to, we call it a tent city, and the trailers, tents, things like that. And I drove a buddy down there once. I went to go check on somebody. He's on a ride along, and he said, "Well, Jim, why can't they just get a job?" And this is what I told him, lovingly and humbly, just to give him the different perspective. I said, "Well, if you live down here, probably means you didn't graduate high school, so you have no high school diploma. You probably don't have a driver's license, and you don't have a bank account. So if you don't have a bank account, a driver's license, or a car, or a diploma, how are you going to rent a place? Who's going to hire you? Even if somebody did hire you for a job, how are you going to get all those things? How are you going to show up to work with food in your belly, somewhere to shower? Somebody on welfare in Canada, a single person on welfare, this stat's a few years old, back 5 years ago, was $305. So could you or I survive on $305 a month?
Nope.
No, so that's why they're basically barely surviving. Why can't people in Canada, all Canadian citizens, thrive? So that's my story of the $305 on welfare. Yeah. They might get AISH, they might get some other subsidies and things like that. But is that enough? Again, when you've suffered the intergenerational trauma, all these ACEs you're talking about, and your parents went to residential school, your grandparents went to residential school, and you were a product of that environment, yeah. How there's no $1 million answer. There's no golden ticket answer how to solve these problems. But what we can do as a Canadian society is love our neighbors, get to know our neighbors, get to know the backstory, get to know people's stories. Love. What did the Beatles say? All I need is love.
Yep. I'm with you 100%. So, and like that comes, part of that isn't even about being curious about somebody else, right? Curious about their culture, curious about their experience and how they live, right? I don't know if I told you this story before, but I think it's appropriate. Did I ever tell you about Daryl Davis, this black blues guy? All right. This just, to me, this epitomizes what racism, how goofy racism is, really. This guy, Daryl, his father, Daryl Davis, his father was a U.S. Government official and traveled all over the world. So Daryl, as a little person, lived in Egypt and lived in, Venezuela and lived in Switzerland and had all these classmates who were, different colors and different religions and different gods and different, there was all these differences. Never had any problem. Everybody got along. Everybody was, they had these friends. Then his dad gets a posting in the U.S. So he comes back to the U.S. for a posting, right? And Daryl is like, I think he's 8 years old at this time. So Daryl joins the Boy Scouts, right? And they're having a parade. So they're going down the street having this parade. And Daryl is getting beamed with rocks and bottles and cans. And he's like, what? How can people... like, why are they mad at the Scouts, right? And they're not mad at the Scouts. Daryl's a black kid, and then everybody else is white. So the Scout leaders, go around him, protect him from getting hit, and then have to explain to him, Daryl, it's not the Cubs, it's not the Scouts that they were mad at. They don't like you, is the reality of it. And he's like, how can they hate me if they never met me? How is that possible? And that's an important question, right? So then what he does, he goes to leaders of Ku Klux Klans and asks that question. He says, have you ever met a black man? No. So they have a black man, or they have a discussion, this black man and this Ku Klux Klan leader. And then the lights on for the Ku Klux Klan guy saying, my God, this person is very much like me. Like, we're not that much different, right? And so many times, I think there was like 14 or 15 times, the Ku Klux Klan guy gave up his leadership of the Klan, gave him over his hood and his robe and said, I'm out. And that's just like, him encouraging somebody to be curious, to have a conversation, right? I think it's an amazing story in terms of that. When you meet somebody, what you learn is that they are so similar to you. The differences are so small and the similarities are so huge, right? So
yeah, exactly. You couldn't have said it better, really. So somebody growing up, somebody who was raised 70 kilometers away from where I was raised, why do we have to be different? Why do we have to consider them that they're different?
Yeah.
Let's celebrate our differences. Let's learn about each other, and let's do some great things. And there's a lot of great people in the city of Lethbridge, on the Blood Reserve, surrounding communities who are doing great things. The Truth and Reconciliation. I would ask anybody watching this, go read those 93 recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Go read the executive summary. It's a pretty long document, but if you read the executive summary, you read those recommendations, it'll open your eyes. Go read some facts on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. All these different things you can go Google and just read some history.
Yeah.
It's not pretty.
No, I know the first time I was told about residential schools, the person who told it to me, who's a college or a university professor, like she should know this stuff, but I wouldn't believe her. I said, no, that can't be right. You don't understand this, right? And then it was me who didn't understand, who didn't want to believe that, right? So that's the reality of it. So
can I tell you a story about 2015 Red Crow College, which used to be a residential school, burnt down on the reserve. So fire started at 3 a.m. I was on scene 5, 6 in the morning, and as soon as it was daylight, we had blockades. You couldn't get too close because it burned for like 2-3 days. And this 85-year-old Indigenous elder, a female, drove up to where we were, and we started walking towards her just to tell her she couldn't come any closer, and we didn't have to say anything. I just kind of knew, just be quiet. And she got out of her car and she said to me, she's like, I just heard the news. I had to come see this for myself. This is the best day of my life.
Yeah. Eh? Wow.
How does that not affect you?
Yeah.
How does that not affect you when you see that?
Yeah. No, I can understand that. Yeah, that place was such a beacon of shame and suffering, right? That to have it burned to the ground was her best day ever, right? So wow. Yeah. Hey, tell me about the Indian Act. The Indian Act, is that a good thing?
It's you're asking the tough questions tonight, Alan. These treaties in this Indian Act, Indian Act's terrible. What can I say? These treaties do. I've heard comments of people saying, "Well, let's get rid of these treaties." And abolish the reserves. Well, it's not that simple. None of this stuff is that clear cut or simple. It is an archaic document that things are. If you read some of these specific things are still in there, it'd make you sick. But there is some good news that the federal government has kind of just been forced to change some of it. Obviously, the ways it does things, granted them citizenship. If you ever heard of, there's things you can look up like Jordan's principles. Like if you ever want to know, like still to this day, how the medical field are racist and intolerant towards Indigenous rights and like how they treat people. Jordan's principles is something you could read, but the fact that some of these things are ingrained in the Indian Act, and they kind of hide behind that, The federal government hides behind certain things. It's abhorrent. It's terrible. So, will it ever be abolished totally? Probably not. But I'm not an expert on that.
Well, my understanding is the Indian Act also has kind of a role still for like an Indian agent, somebody to be the intermediary between the Aboriginal people, the indigenous people, and the whites. Is that kind of correct still, I think?
So the last official Indian agent, I think they were gone 60s, I think. But no, there's still like I think within the federal government, there's still somebody assigned to like, well, you have the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, those are, so I don't know per se if a specific person for each reserve is still considered an Indian agent. I've never met one. So, but yeah, there's still some things that need to change.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned to you that when we had a chat a week ago or so, I want to enhance my knowledge, satisfy my curiosity about indigenous ways, especially about how they raise kids and about how the ceremonies they would go through, right? That, little, Ryan Heavy Shields, and when he's 4 years old, there's this ceremony, there's the prairie chicken ceremony. I'm making this stuff. I don't know. But then, at age 8, well, there's this ceremony and they're all like kind of marks along the way that this is how this child is to develop, right? And this is how they're going to be a good person in their tribe and contribute to the well-being of their community, right? So
you're talking about societies. These kids would join at a certain age, would join a society. To this day, there's the Pigeons, there's the Brave Dogs, there's the Horns, there's the female society, the Mota Geeks. They're these holy women. Again, they have their own group. And so back in the day, 200 years ago, you basically have a feeder program to make these young men warriors, make them fathers, make them, how do you take care of your family? And that's the spirit of the warrior. You're taking care of the entire camp. You're protecting the camp. And they had stages along the whole way. Certain age groups, you had responsibilities. And to this day, at the Sundance, they have these responsibilities. It exists to this day. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome to see. So on the female side, you had grandmas, aunts, mothers who showed these young ladies all the skills they needed to then, again, in the end, to join these sacred societies, to make these covenants, make their people better, make themselves better. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. They had these programs that's their life revolved around, the buffalo hunt, the Sundance, all these different things. And you had to be ready and have the skills to live, to do these things. And then we came along and then we messed it all up for them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think there's a lot we could learn by understanding traditional indigenous ways and then figure out how we might be able to apply that in terms of this, as you said, a feeder system, right? That here's the steps. And we want all these kiddos to go through these steps, right? Learn what they're going to learn and have the supports of those adults who are teaching them, right? Or could be not even adults, could be aunts, uncles, older, well, no, those are adults, but older sibling as well, right? Could be that, the 8-year-old is teaching the 4-year-old and the 12-year-old is teaching the 8-year-old, right? That kind of thing. So, yeah.
So here's my one thing of anybody going forward who wants to know more. You have to realize that these, let's say you see a hoop dance, or you go to a powwow and you see all this regalia and things. Well, that's one small aspect of their lives. And then you have, so that's more a social kind of thing. Still great. Still they're learning there's these traditional dances and things. And then you have the ceremonies of the Sundance. And then you have real life in between all that. You can't pigeonhole or tokenize, just one aspect of their culture, of their life. So that's the one warning I'd give people. Don't just assume because you've been to a powwow or you've seen the hoop dance, or let's say you've been through a blanket ceremony, which is great. You don't know a whole. Don't pigeonhole something on just one thing you see, good or bad. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's lots of different aspects of their lives.
Right.
Get to know all the aspects of their lives. Get to know somebody and they can tell you more about it. Ask them. They're the experts. I'm just somebody who's been out there for almost 13 years and try to make a difference.
Yeah. Well, you're an inspiration. I want to help you do the wonderful work you're doing, Jim. Wow. I really think that there's so much potential we have to like make the conditions or assist in the conditions where kids can thrive. First Nations original, if I understand, like every child that comes into this world has like a special purpose and special gifts and special talents that the whole process, the feeder program of developing and identifying and exposing these kiddos to these different talents allows them to excel and be the best person they could be. But if they don't get enough to eat, if they don't get sleep, if they don't, if there's all these barriers to that every human being needs in order to function at their best, well, if they don't get those things, they can't have those experiences and they can't become their best, right? So I'm not, I think there's personal responsibility thing too, but there sure as hell isn't any personal responsibility for a 5-year-old not being able to go to school because, they don't have anybody looking out for them or making sure they got food or getting them off to school or, those kind of things. So, yeah.
Okay, so I got to give a mad tip of the hat, mad props to the educators and the school system on the reserve because they do their very best. They don't want to leave any child behind. They're trying to do everything they can to get the kids to school, get them fed, educate them properly, with love and kindness, in a culturally sensitive manner. So Kainai Board of Education, the Pagani the Pagan Board of Education, man, they're doing way more with way less.
Yeah.
So props to them, tip of the hat to them because they're doing their very best.
Well, props to you as well. You and your Rotary Club. You guys are an inspiration. We need more engagement that way, more understanding that way, more efforts to make life better for our Indigenous brothers and sisters and all of us, right? Man, every child that we can make a better life for, they have an impact on what, 20 people, 100 people? I don't know what the fan out effect is, but every person that we can help, there's a fan out effect that they're also making a difference in 10 or 20 or 50 lives kind of a thing. And depending on when we are able to provide a help, that might make a difference for decades to come. Right? Like just that intervention. So I think the power that we have is just carrying people that want to help us and our Indigenous brothers and sisters and their kiddos excel. I think that there's huge value in what we can do.
If we have time, I want to talk about one family who are in the Army Cadets with me.
Sure.
There's a family that, again, a single mom, 3 daughters, all came through the Army Cadet program. Again, very little means that I found out later on that the mom left a relationship, left with nothing, with these 3 daughters. All 3 daughters are going to university or college.
Wow.
One was Miss Blackfoot Canada. One of them, the oldest one that was with me longest in Army Cadets, she just started a prestigious job, I think, in Calgary.
Nice.
So I went from seeing these kids from 12 years old to now parents, university graduates. And, that's why I think these programs, anything that can help these kids, man,
That's exciting. What a difference, right? Like what a huge difference that's going to make in those girls' lives and in the mom's life. She's got to have such a degree, like so much hope for the future that, her daughters had the opportunity to have those experiences. And now it's with their effort and the opportunity, they're having great lives, right? So that's amazing. Hey, we're over an hour, my friend, so we should probably call this good.
All right.
Thank you for attending. Can you say Oki as a greeting and when you leave as well? No, just for greeting.
So, Agadarimutsen.
Okay. Hey. How about Miigwech? That's thank you, isn't it?
Yeah, wrong part of the country. But yeah, I do know that one.
Oh, that's the wrong part of the country. That's not Blackfoot. That's like, what is that?
Oh, that's out in Ontario.
Oh, all right.
Manitoba, Ontario, yeah.
Anyways, thank you for watching. We're going to be back next week with another episode of 1,000 Ways to Be a Champion for Children, past, present, and future. If you want to participate, come on back. Thanks again to Jim for being our guest. You're doing amazing things. You're a beautiful human being. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you all for the opportunity.
All right. See ya.